Well, good morning, guys. This is Tommy Ellison. I'm streaming to YouTube this morning. This is only my second or third time to stream to YouTube. And yesterday I did my first as far as a long-term broadcast was concerned. But welcome. And coming to you from the great state of Alabama this morning. A beautiful day, going to be about 70 degrees. And I do want to make one little quick clarification before I begin today on what I mean by vanity cards. I explained yesterday about how they are little, I guess, stamps on production and creativity, and movies have been using them for years. And most recently, we see the vanity cards at the ends of episodes of Dharma and Greg, and most recently Big Bang Theory by a gentleman named Chuck Lorre, the producer. So, but anyway, vanity cards are basically just little stamps on creations that basically earmark when and where and what our thoughts and thinkings were at the time this content was created. So that's why I refer to them as my vanity cards. They're my stories that I'm going to be telling about my life. And this morning I wanted to share with you a story. It's an old story. Back in 1969, I played high school in football, and I was fortunate enough to actually receive a scholarship to the University of Alabama, or excuse me, to the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And I'm trying to get my Stream Deck menu up properly. There we go. And anyway, had the opportunity to play football at the collegiate level at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, the Moccasins, they were called. And unfortunately, or fortunately maybe, I was redshirted. And back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, freshmen really didn't play a lot. And so if you didn't play at all, you actually got redshirted. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it basically means that you don't spend your first year of eligibility. You typically get 4 at the collegiate level if you're playing by the rules. And that's another story. But the first year of eligibility can be what's called redshirted, where if you fail to play a down or even dress for a game, then you actually can go to your sophomore year in school, and it'll actually be your first year of eligibility when you play. And I hope that makes sense. It didn't to me for a long time. But anyway, I was redshirted, and with intentions of holding me a year, I guess, to let me develop a little bit more. I was actually a very young freshman. When I went to college, I was 17. I turned 18 in the fall, but I was young. I was large. I was about 6'5", 6'6", somewhere in that neighborhood, and I weighed in at about 285, and so I was ready to play at that level, but I got redshirted. And the crux of this story is really not about football, but what happened after the season, because normally at the college level, football players are not just, September to November guys. It's a year-round thing with what they call the fall season, and then you have winter workouts, and then you have the spring training. And so you're constantly in the gym, in the weight room, in the practice fields, and or should say on the practice fields, and in team meetings talking about ultimate strategies. And rather than do winter workouts, which are rather boring, a lot of running, a lot of weights and stuff, I asked our head coach if I could instead work out with the wrestling team. And at that point in time, the university had a very good wrestling team. In fact, the University of Chattanooga was well known for its wrestling program. And back in those days, there were a number of schools in the Southeastern Conference that were actually fielding a wrestling team. And so there was a lot of tournaments that were going on. And so I was working out as a heavyweight, which is what they call the unlimited division. It didn't have a weight class. I didn't have to, sweat and spit to make my weight every match. I could just eat what I wanted. But nevertheless, it wasn't my intention to actually compete in wrestling. I just wanted to break a sweat and give the coaches the idea that I was actually keeping in shape and working out. And so that's what I was doing. I was working out with the first string, the top of the guy ladder in the heavyweight division. And so the very first event that our wrestling team went to was called the Southeastern Invitational, and it was actually a bunch of teams that were competing in most invitational tournaments. And unfortunately, our heavyweight was injured and dislocated his shoulder in his first or second match, and was, of course, disqualified from the tournament. But by the same token, he was rendered a medical red shirt as far as wrestling was concerned. So he was out for the season. Do you feel it coming? It's now the coaches are looking at me and saying, well, gee, Tommy, you're the only other heavyweight we have, and you do have some wrestling experience, so you're the guy. And it was kind of crazy because I had wrestled in high school, and it was a great sport, but my senior year I didn't wrestle at all because there was another guy that was a very good wrestler in the heavyweight class. And so I didn't wrestle in high school except for my sophomore and junior year, kind of laid out my senior year. And so here I am at the collegiate level wrestling for the university in the heavyweight division. And we were moving from the invitational tournament that they had competed in to now what is known as a dual match, where one team versus another school's team, and all the weight classes wrestle off. And those of you who know about amateur wrestling, this is no surprise. This isn't like television wrestling. Believe me, it's not. So I'm looking at our schedule, and the very first match that we have, dual match, is with the University of Alabama. That's the backstory of this. Now, we began to wrestle our lightweights and our middleweights, and it was coming close to the time where the heavyweight match, the final match of the night, would be wrestled off. And I'm dressed and ready to go. And at that time, and this is important to the story, at that time, the University of Alabama, which had a great wrestling team, actually carried with them two heavyweights. One was a gentleman by the name of Jim Croft, and I'll tell you more about him later. And the second one was a little fella by the name of John Hanna, which, if you follow professional football, you know that name. Both of those guys, Croft and Hanna, played for the University of Alabama football team, but also wrestled on the wrestling team. And so they would flip a coin, and I think they actually swapped out nights. One would wrestle one night, one would wrestle the next event, and they would go back and forth because they were both very, very good wrestlers. And I happened to pick, or not pick, but I happened to draw Jim Croft. And I was I was kind of excited that I didn't get Hanna because he was a big dude. But Croft was a little smaller heavyweight. He was a lightweight heavyweight. In fact, this is a picture of his playing card from the University of Alabama, and you can see where he actually weighed in at about 240 and was 6'2", I think. He was a center at Alabama. He eventually, I think, made All-America. But anyway, that was the guy that I pulled on this wrestling match, number 54, Jim Croft, from Newark, Delaware. Now, Jim was a great wrestler, but at the time, I didn't know exactly how good he was. In fact, I found his bio in prepping for this show, and I wanted to show you this because Jim, as you can see, was a homegrown from Delaware, All-American, center at the University of Alabama. He was picked on the 72 All-American football team. He was on the unbeaten 72 team. He was a Delaware Athlete of the Year. He was an All-Southeastern Conference player. He played in 3 bowls, it looks like, in the Senior Bowl, Coach's All-American game. He was drafted by the Oakland Raiders and later released, but then he played for the British Columbia. But look at that last line. At Tattenall School, which was the private school he attended, he won 4 national prep wrestling titles with a record of 103-0. And that was my opponent for that night. When it came time to wrestle, my coach told me, he said, Tommy, he said, you know, this guy's good. And I said, yes, sir. I've watched him play football in the fall. I've never seen him wrestle. And he said, well, he's good. In fact, he's going to wrestle you like a middleweight, which I'm not sure if everyone will understand that. But heavyweights tend to wrestle with a lot of brawn and, you know, a lot of muscle, where the middle and the lightweight guys were strategic wrestlers, and they used different types of holds and escapes and reversals than heavyweights typically did. And thus, I had a limited knowledge of how middleweights wrestled, or even how middleweights and lightweights even strategize their matches. And so it came time to wrestle Jim. And well, I'll show you. I had some photographic evidence that I'd had in my archives. I don't even remember how long I've had these pictures, but I guess I got these from the school photographer. But this is the shot of me wrestling Jim Croft that night at the university. You can see down at the bottom of that picture, that's actually the back side of that picture. It says Tom Ellison versus Jim Croft, University of Tennessee versus Alabama, on December the 12th, 1969. I wanted to let that sink in for a second, because as I was getting ready to take the mat for the first time, my coach came over to me and grabbed me by the shoulders, and he said, Tommy, he said, whatever you do, I know this guy's going to wrestle you like a lighter weight, and I know you don't know a lot of that strategy, but whatever you do, don't let him put you in the pretzel hold. And I said, Coach, what's the pretzel hold? And he said, you'll know it when you feel it. So the match began. And as you can see from the picture, we were in an upright position for just a very few moments until he took me down to the mat and started to make his move. And next thing you know, I'm placed in, I guess, what my coach referred to as the pretzel hold. And the only way I can describe the pretzel hold is that your opponent wraps you up in such a way that you are literally almost bent double. And it's a very unique position, because as you're fighting to keep from being pinned, you're laying on your back, and yet you can see your legs over your head to some degree. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is the pretzel hold. And I wasn't exactly sure how to counter it. I didn't know the countermeasures for this type of style of wrestling, but I did notice that I thought, look, there was a big set of, and excuse me, ladies, but I could tell through the tights, there was a big set of testicles hanging right above my head. And so I thought, if I'm going to get out of this, I'm going to have to take drastic measures. And I opened my mouth and I bared my teeth and I bit them. And they were mine. They were mine. Well, he leaped up off the mat. Let me rephrase that. He jumped up off the mat, grabbed me by the neck, threw me down on the mat, pinned me. And my match, the University of Chattanooga heavyweight, Tommy Ellison, versus Jim Croft of the University of Alabama, was officially over. Now, the good news was my match did not necessarily determine the outcome of the entire meet. They were good wrestlers, and they ultimately were ahead of us so far when that match took place that it didn't make a lot of difference. But it was an interesting evening for me. Now, I also have to be honest with you. I made up the part about the pretzel hold, but it makes a nice ending to a story that maybe wasn't so funny at the time. But I look back now and think, oh, well, that's just part of my so-called life. And I'm glad you were here today to hear it. And thank you for joining me. This is Tommy Ellison signing off. We'll see you tomorrow.